Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for a discussion with the Honorable Ambassador Bonnie D. Jenkins, who is the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security at the U.S. Department of State. Our theme is the future of Black voices in international policy, and it's an important topic as we recognize the value of diverse American voices and representation in U.S. foreign policy. And what better time for today's theme than during Black History Month? Today's event is presented by the Atlantic Council's Black Employee Network to acknowledge and celebrate the contributions of Black leaders in shaping the global future in a manner that promotes inclusion and equality. Our featured speaker, Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, is a true example and trailblazer in this regard. She has a rich mosaic of experiences and public service that contribute to shaping U.S. foreign policy and shaping the global future. It's hard to quickly do justice to her vast bio, but let me try to summarize and hit some of the high points here. As I said, she's the U.S. Secretary of State for Arms Control and International Security. She has a PhD, and in her role at the State Department, she currently she leads 3 bureaus: the Arms Control, Compliance and Verification Bureau, International Security and Non-Proliferation Bureau, and the Political Military Affairs Bureau. And since May 2023, she was also named by Secretary Blinken as a senior official to lead the department's efforts on a UK-US implementation. She previously served in the Obama administration as a special envoy and coordinator for threat reduction programs in the Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation. She was the lead for all 4 nuclear security summits held from 2010 to 2016, as well as the U.S. representative to the G7 Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction. Before serving as the coordinator, she was a legal advisor to the U.S. Arms Control Disarmament Agency, where she provided advice to ambassadors and delegations negotiating arms control and nonproliferation treaties. She's provided legal advice to treaty implementation bodies, including Chemical Weapons Convention, Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, Open Skies Treaty, and the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, amongst others. She's worked with international institutions such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, the World Health Organization, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and many more. From 2014 to 2017, Ambassador Jenkins led our diplomatic efforts to promote global health security for a group of 70 countries, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and private sector companies that build countries' capacity to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious diseases threats such as Ebola and Zika. In 2016, she was the nominee for the Secretary's Award for Excellence in International Security Affairs. She has also, in her earlier career, served as a program officer for the Ford Foundation in the U.S. Foreign and Security Policy and Conflicts. She also is the founder and executive director and board chair of an organization called Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, which was a leading advocacy organization supporting women of color in security and peace building. She served as a professor, an adjunct professor at Georgetown University Law School, as well as the university's School of Foreign Service and at the George Washington Elliott School of International Affairs. She's been a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. She has a PhD in international relations, an LLM. She has an MPA. She has a JD, and she's also attended the Hague Academy for International Law, and she's a retired U.S. Naval Reserve officer with many awards. In addition to having Ambassador Jenkins with us, we're privileged to have this morning as our moderator, Ms. Jelena Porter, who brings her own set of excellence to our event. She began her career as a Peace Corps volunteer teaching English in rural Cambodia, and throughout her career, she's advised and trained several members of Congress, leading U.S. diplomats, corporate CEOs, and several local elected officials nationwide. In 2021, Jelena became the first African-American woman to serve as principal deputy spokesperson at the United States Department of State. She's received a number of awards and recognitions, including one of the top 35 Black Americans in national security and foreign policy, recipient of the Franklin Williams Award from the United States Peace Corps. She was featured on The Root as one of the most influential African Americans and one of the top 10 influential Black Americans in foreign policy by the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. She attended Howard University and Georgetown University in Oxford, and she's an active member in the Council on Foreign Relations, Delta Sigma Theta, and the Links. She has dedicated her life to being a global citizen, and she says that she believes service is the rent we pay for living on this beautiful planet Earth. With that, I will turn it over to our featured speakers this morning to begin the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Oh, wait a minute. I think we need to do that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. Happy Black History Month. Yes. Amy. Y'all can say it back. Y'all can say it back. Well, again, my name is Jelena Porter, and it is such a privilege and delight to be here with the Honorable Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, who I've had just the delight to learn from, to work with on a number of ways for a number of years. I'd also like to thank the Atlantic Council and the Black Employee Network for sponsoring this event and seeing the importance of Black voices in international security. So today we're going to facilitate a moderated discussion followed by some Q&A from the audience. So I'm just going to start this off. Ambassador Jenkins, take us from the beginning. What inspired your very storied career? And let me just say thank you for your service, because it's not easy, and I think oftentimes public servants don't hear that enough, so thank you for your service. So what started off your career in foreign policy? Was it a specific person, or were there a chain of events that inspired you to do this work?
Well, first of all, thank you, Atlantic Council, for inviting me. This is a great opportunity. I always like coming here and speaking in this this forum, so thank you for that. Thank you, Janine, for such a nice introduction. Of course, Jelena, it's always a pleasure to be here with you. So I guess just very briefly, when I grew up in the Bronx, New York, and from the very beginning, since I can remember, I've always been interested in public service. Right. I always knew I wanted to work in the federal government in Washington and live in Virginia. That was my thing, work in Washington, live in Virginia. So my path was to learn about government from different perspectives. So I started working in New York City government. Then I went upstate to Albany to school so I could learn about U.S. state government. And then I made it down to Washington through the Presidential Management Fellowship Program. And at that time, I didn't really know exactly what kind of law I wanted to do, because I just finished my law degree, but I knew I wanted to be in public service. So through the program that I had, I landed in the Department of Defense. And while I was there, I went to a meeting that my mentor was having, and I sat in, and what he was doing was providing legal advice to delegations that were overseas negotiating treaties on weapons of mass destruction. And I had never really thought about weapons of mass destruction issues at all. So when I sat in that meeting, it's like a light bulb went off, and I said, oh my God, this is great. And I said, I really want to do public international law, but I actually want to be on the delegations overseas, not necessarily providing the guidance for positions in negotiations. So I went to an agency where that's where, if you wanted to do that, that's where you went. So it was a place called the Arms Control Disarmament Agency, or ACTA as it used to be called. And I joined them as a lawyer. Okay. And then that's really what started my path, really just happening to go to a meeting, because I was actually kind of bored that day. And I said, well, let me see where my mentor is going. I just kind of followed him, and that's how it really all happened.
That's a wonderful story. So alignment and mentorship, we'll come back to that. Mm-hmm. So at a certain point in your career, you decided to take a break from government and focus specifically on impact. And again, this is where our work initially collided when you founded Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, or WCAPS. And I can remember it just like it was yesterday, us at Truman headquarters with your launch event. You saw that there was a significant gap in representation in foreign policy and international security. So walk us through you addressing that gap and then fixing that gap. Mm-hmm. And then tell us how your role as founder and executive director of WCAPS has impacted your role now.
Well, through the years that I was working in public service, particularly federal government, I did recognize that there was a gap, particularly in the hard security fields, which is what I do. And I really got concerned because I really was the only black person in almost everything, and also person of color. There weren't a lot of other people of color either in these fields. So that was the first thing that I realized that I needed to try to do something about that. And so when I had the break after I left the Obama administration, I figured that was a good time to try to do something. But also, leading up to that point, I was also working in other areas of peace and security, not just hard security. So when I was at the Ford Foundation, I also had a portfolio in addition to the U.S. foreign and security policy portfolio that was called conflicts. And in this portfolio, I funded organizations that were doing work on more what they call the soft security issues, peacekeeping and other types of security, food security, water security, things like that. So my perspective was very much peace and security overall. So I had two ideas. One was to bring more people of color, particularly women, who, because I kept hearing from many women of color how they were always only one in the rooms, and lacking seeing women of color in panels and things like that. So it was to bring more women into the hard security fields. But even in the soft security fields where I saw more women, they still weren't at the top. They still weren't in position of leadership. So that's really why I started it. And I also wanted to develop a support system, so that women don't always feel like they're by themselves. They have people they can reach out to, and even if they're not exactly in the same field, there's other women who they can who they can talk to and help stay in the field, because we lose people because they often don't see enough of themselves. For young women who can see other women who are more seasoned, who are in these fields, they could say to themselves, if they can do it, I can do it too, because it really does matter to see that. And also just to have this network, and so we don't have to anymore say that we don't know any women who can be on this panel or that panel, to say, no, we have lots of women who specialize in all these areas. You just don't know who they are, or you don't know how to get them. And so it was for a number of those reasons that I did it.
I think you make a fabulous point. Retention is a direct reflection of representation. So again, thank you for paving the way, and I know we still have some work to do on that. So I'm going to take a point of personal privilege right now. Something that was not in your bio, at least in the one submitted here. I don't know if it's the same on the State Department website, but if it's not, we got to get your staff here to update this. Very, very important point. Just last year, you joined the most illustrious sorority on planet Earth, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And so for those of you who may not know, Delta is an international public service sorority founded at Howard University, where I pledged, by the way. And what we know the tenets of Delta are scholarship, sisterhood, service, and social action. And so when you think about what Deltas have done over the years, and you obviously being as historic as you are, you came on a very historic slate with Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, so many other people. So this was just monumental for you all to come and hear and then put Delta on this pedestal. We know for as long as we can remember, voting rights, democracy, lots of social issues have been on the plate. And frankly, it's what helped catalyze the president into his role. It was the work of Deltas. It was the work of African-American women who helped him solidify this presidency. So with that being said, what would you say is the value of Black women specifically in foreign policy and national security, and how can we continue to elevate Black women in this space?
Yeah, and thanks, because the bio is actually a little outdated, so I do have to update it.
We got to put that on the bio.
So yes, I mean, just very briefly, it was great. I accepted as an honorary member of Delta, along with an illustrious line of other women. It really did, not only is it great to be part of this wonderful organization, but being around all these other Black women, and I've had an opportunity to do a number of activities with Delta, really does instill just the power of Black women working together. And I know that the Deltas were also a strong proponent, of course, of Supreme Court Ketanji Jackson getting in her position as well, and very supportive of these causes, voting rights, as you said, and we're instrumental in the early days of that for women. So it's just a reminder of just the power of women, the power of Black women fighting for a cause. Yes. And And so I'm just very blessed to be a part of this, and I'm a very committed member now to do as much as I can to continue to lift up women, Black women in these fields of foreign policy, international security, bring more of that light to the organization.
Well, we thank you,
Yeah.
and we appreciate you.
Yeah.
So you are a historic figure. You are the first Black Undersecretary of State ever. Mic drop ever. So we can probably get a round of applause for that, because that is very, very, very significant. You know, it's no secret that in foreign policy and in international affairs that there have been significant barriers to entry for Black women, other minorities, coming a long way at every level, from the entry level, internship, fellowship, all the way to the senior level. It's something that Ambassador Thomas Greenfield has written about. It's something that former Congresswoman, now Mayor Karen Bass, has written about. I wrote about it last year on a very intimate level. So can you tell us some of the challenges that you face and what you've overcome as the first Black Undersecretary of State, not only as a leader, but also in advocating for more women of color in this space?
First of all, let me congratulate you for your own accomplishments that Janine mentioned earlier today. You know, I think, you know, you know, when you get to, let's say, where I am in terms of being an undersecretary, first I was a little surprised to find out that I was the first.
Right, in 2021.
In 2021, so that was a little, yeah, that was really a surprise. You know, a number of things are important to me. One is that I not be the last.
Yeah.
That, you know, I'm hoping that I can be a role model for people I know, people I don't know, who can also aspire to be in leadership roles in government. But it also means that I've had to, you know, I've had my share of having to prove myself 15 times over. And I don't think that ever really goes away. I think that if you are, you know, African American, particularly in areas of security where there's so few people, much fewer people of color, you know, it just kind of comes with the territory that you're always going to be running into people who may not, you know, appreciate what you bring to the table, and you have to go through the proving thing again. I think the difference is that as you get into that situation so many times, you don't really spend a lot of time worrying about proving yourself. You just kind of, because you don't have time for that, you just kind of do your work. And either people can accept that or not, but you don't necessarily worry about that because you have to get something done. And so, you know, but I think it's important, you know, in terms of helping younger people understand the challenges, you know, that, you know, women feel, particularly women of color feel, you know, in these spaces, because you are always going to be challenged. And you have to get to the point where you have to be persistent. You can't let that really take you off your game.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to be successful in fields where there aren't that many of people who look like me, it's just part of the territory. But by doing that, you open doors for others, because then people will see that it won't be so different. You know, I think people grow up seeing a certain thing on TV or around them, and in media they see a certain look. And so when they see a look that's not what they're used to for all their lives, it makes them even feel a little uncomfortable, because it's not, wait a minute, that's not the culture that I learned. And so some people are easier at adjusting to that than others. So that's why it's important to have diversity, so that people can see that there is no one look to be good at something or to excel at something. You know, certain people have more privileges and so are able to be in those positions more. And that's more the reason than the fact that a certain group does not particularly belong in there. So seeing, hopefully I can be, just by being here, can be someone who others can see that, okay, I haven't seen that on TV or in the movies, but hey, it can happen, and it actually is. It's not a bad thing.
Absolutely, and I'm going to take another point of personal privilege here, because something that was impactful for me, being my true self in the workplace, is coming to senior staff meetings and seeing you wearing your braids and wearing your natural hair, and something that I do the same, and I did it while I was there too, and that was taboo, not only to be these Black women, but to embrace who we are and the wholeness of who we are. And it was really important for me, because when I worked for then Congressman Cedric Richmond, I worked on the Crown Act, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair, so we can dismantle discrimination on Afro-textured hair. And I think it's so important because, as we know, housing, the military once discriminated against the way our hair comes out of our head. So it's just very important to walk in your true self. And not to get political, but Marianne Williamson, just as the author, she once said that when you shine your light, you give permission for other people to shine your light too. So thank you for shining your light.
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually wearing braids, and I have found that, I haven't found that to be, fortunately for me, not to be a real issue. And I think sometimes, like you said, you just be who you are, because you do your best work when you're who you are.
Absolutely.
If you don't have to worry about
and you inspire other people when you do it.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about carrying all the stuff on your back that, in terms of all these concerns. You just be who you are. And, I have found that, when I'm, like you said, when you're your true self, you're your best self. So.
Absolutely. So I'm going to switch gears here. Something that is often, I would say, not discussed, at least discussed publicly, is how do we really cultivate, systems of support in the workplace, especially in this field where, again, we're still not seeing lots of people like us, lots of diversity. Can you talk about the importance of, you mentioned your mentor, so having workplace sponsors and mentors, as well as professional development in the workplace for people at every level?
Yeah. I think there's two things important. One is inclusiveness. I think people have to feel as if they're included. We talk about DEIA, and the diversity is important, but even once you get diversity, keeping people in is important. And a lot of that's about people feeling included in different workspaces. So I think that's very important. And of course, mentorship support systems. Something I always say is you have to have a support system. You have to have people who got your back. People you can go to if you're having a bad day. And I also think it's important that the workplace recognize that people have different perceptions and people have different reactions to things. And something else I started was called Organizations in Solidarity. And the reason why I started that, which is kind of an offshoot of WCAPS, is because after the George Floyd murder, some people were saying in my discussions that they were upset that the organizations that they are part of didn't really understand how they felt the next day. And some organizations were very helpful and had opportunities for people to express their disappointments or their concerns or whatever they were feeling. And that's what you do if you want to really show that people are included, that people respect them, that people care about their viewpoints, and how just being Black in America or being a person of color in America is not always that easy, and you have regular challenges. And so that's the kind of thing that helps people feel included and should be part of what people are able to have at different places.
Absolutely. So you are also known for that. Whenever you do interviews and make public appearances, you also always make an effort to talk about the pipeline. And again, thank you for that, because I really just appreciate the fact that you take building the bench, as we like to say, seriously. And something that we can appreciate that the State Department is doing now is a lot of efforts for city and state diplomacy. Now, we know you're from the Bronx and proud from the Bronx. So how have you been able to inspire and coach the next generation of just hometown budding leaders from the Bronx or other small towns across the country?
Yeah, one of the things that I like doing, both overseas but also in the U.S., is whenever I do some official visits, I like to also go to colleges or universities or other schools to meet with people and to talk about my work. Very often, as I said, growing up in the Bronx, I didn't often meet people who did the type of work that I do now. Or I didn't think much about foreign service or international security issues. I think that's probably, I think for a lot of communities that may be a little different now with globalization, people are a lot more aware. But still, it's important to do that. So I really make an effort to engage young people whenever I travel, whether domestically or internationally. And if all of us did that, if people who are in these fields could do that, we can really touch a lot more people more directly than, let's say, through the internet.
Absolutely.
Like that. Yeah.
So I have a question and a plug, so bear with me. So in the spirit of inclusion, what advice do you have for young people of color who are wondering how to get in this field, how they're navigating internships and fellowships. And in that spirit, sharing is caring. I think when I was coming in, it was all about this. It was a network. Again, I'm a first-time appointee. No one in my family had ever done anything like this. So actually a colleague, a State Department colleague, shared this information about the William D. Clark Diplomatic Security Fellowship. And they are encouraging everyone to apply. So if you see this, please join an information session on February 22nd at 8 p.m. and they have their information online. I was privy to more of the Bunch Fellowship and the Payne Fellowship, and like that, this covers if you want to go to grad school, and this is a wonderful opportunity. And as you know, DS or diplomatic security is really important. So what advice do you have for people who are just getting their feet wet?
Well, certainly getting information. It's like you said, I mean, some of these things exist and people don't really know they exist. There's Payne, as you mentioned, Rangel, Pickering Fellowships, or PMF Fellowships. And it's so much easier than when I was growing up to get information about fellowships. I mean, you still have, college offices that do, looking at careers and things like that. You have so much easier now because you got the internet, and you don't have to do the long research that I had to do when I was growing up. So really, it's about research, and it's amazing how much you can find out just by looking up what kind of internships exist. So the important thing is to know they're out there. I knew about PMF because I was told about PMF when I went into grad school. And because the school let me know about it. So I got really excited about it because, as I said, I wanted to get down to Washington, so that was a great way for me to go. But really just do your research. You really have to go and look and see. And if your school does have, study abroad programs, please take advantage of those because it gives you an opportunity to get out and experience the world. And it's amazing how once your mind opens up to these things just seem to come at you. And you meet people who know these things, and
Absolutely.
So much of it is what people can tell you, but really just do the research. Take the time to find out, if you have a passion, and then that passion is international relations or international security or any type of area in peace and security. Lots of departments and agencies have internships. The State Department has year-round internships now, paid internships, which are great.
Paid, yes.
Exactly. I've had 4 interns, and one of my wonderful interns is actually here today, and she helped prepare this. The internships, they provide housing.
Oh, wonderful.
As well. So
That's an
really
important
just,
point.
do the research. It's really worth the time to do that.
Absolutely. So I want to switch gears again. Can you tell us, and this is broad, what are your most difficult challenges in your role right now, and can you share just one story of overcoming one of them?
Well, I mean, there's on the substance side, I mean, there's just, we look at the areas of, look at the field of international security, there's just a lot of changes happening right now. And I think the biggest challenge for all my bureaus and the work that I do on AUKUS as well is the changing international security landscape. But almost in any way you could see changes. We're talking about the big changes like what's going on with Ukraine and Israel-Gaza situation. The way you're talking about emerging technologies, which are amazing things for the good, but they also can be misused like everything else. We're in a spirit of change right now, and so that's really the biggest challenge. But what I feel positive is I see how people come to work every day in my bureaus to try to find answers, and without even knowing how these things are going to end up. We don't know what's going to happen, for example, with Russia and Ukraine. We don't know how that's going to end up. But we can't wait to see. We have to think about, what does that world going to look like? What is the world going to look like, in different parts of the world with the different technologies? And so that gives me hope, despite all the changes that, we've gone through changes in the past, we've made it through, and so we'll figure all this out, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think with all of the changes, what we've heard online and kind of going back and forth with this new generation is, threats of AI and, this generation being on TikTok or not being on TikTok and how they filter information Do you see that type of emerging technology being a threat? You know, I think when this new generation is coming up right now, you have a lot of them who may think of foreign policy and they don't think that it is an attractive and sexy field, right? They look at influencers, they look at entertainers, they look at actors and actresses who kind of tap into policy and politics when they want to, right? And when it's convenient for them, and they'll come to Washington and meet with decision makers. But what can we do to really convince this new generation that this is a worthwhile career field, that it is exciting? Of course, it has its challenges, but what can we really do to help garner that next generation? Of course, we talked about retention. So recruitment is one thing, but that retention is another.
Well, two things. I think it's important that we have the older generation, or understand the impact of the new technology. We have our perspective. The younger generation of their perspective is based on what they know and what they've experienced, which is different from what we know, what we experienced. But I think it's important for us to understand as much as we can how they're perceiving some of these issues, that we can help talk with them about them. But also, influencers are influencers, and maybe those are the ones we should also get to. I mean, I was on a panel in COP28, and on my panel was an influencer, and she was really passionate about nuclear energy.
Right.
And so it was great having her on the panel, because then she could, she was saying, she was also a model, and she was saying, people asking me, why do I talk about nuclear energy? And she said, because that interests me. I could be an influencer on these issues, but that doesn't mean I can't care about the world,
right?
What's going on in the world, and because that's real, and younger people understand climate change, and they understand, nuclear energy is a part of a mix that countries can use for sustainability. Not just people think nuclear, they think, oh my God, nuclear war, but there's actually a positive aspect to it. So it was great having her on the panel, because she can influence people. So, part of it is helping young people to understand influence are not just about the social side. It's about, you can have influencers who are really talking about real issues and why we should care about these things. And so I think, we have to better understand this whole new area.
Right.
It's not new, but it's kind of new. Just
right.
like TikTok and influencing things. And maybe that should be the influencers of policy, or the influencers of foreign policy.
I think, to sum it up, I think it's just celebrating the diversity of messengers, right? And of course, we're always going to look to experts like you and other experts within the government. But again, there are everyday people, and then there are influencers who truly care, and they want to learn, and they want to share your work. So I'm glad to hear you say that. So I have one more question before we transition to the audience Q&A, is if there's one thing that you hope people in the audience do today as a result of what you've shared in this conversation, what would you say?
That everyone can carry forth the importance of understanding why we need to have diversity of thought, of culture in our foreign policy and in our security. Because we are faced with a lot of real challenges, whether you're talking about climate change and food security, or all the way over on this side, which is weapons of mass destruction. We're not going to find the answers we need unless we have all of the intelligent people at the table. And that means you have to open it up for everybody. I always say we never know if we missed out on finding a cure of cancer. And because we have kept people from the table. We have kept people from the table who could have expertise because of our system, and making it challenging for everyone to get access, equal access to excel at their capabilities. We are losing out. We're losing out on answers that somebody could be bringing to the table, but they just don't have the same opportunities. So we do ourselves a disservice by not making sure that we have everyone who could add to the answers we need for these huge global challenges. So if everybody could just understand that and recognize that it's better for us to have more people than less, it's better for us to promote inclusion, and please come here. What are your thoughts, and what can you add? We all bring what we have experienced. We all bring our life experiences with us, and our intellect, and our viewpoints. And the best policy is going to be the policy based on one that is representative of what everybody can bring to the table. And we're at the point that we have no choice. We have to do that if we're going to deal with these challenges.
You know what, something you said actually sparked a follow-up question in me, because you're right. The way the world is moving, the global majority is like this room. So by 2050, we're not going to be the minority anymore. So what piece of advice or what suggestions do you have for people I like to call our advocates or allies who are not people of color? What can they do to help garner us and welcome us and sponsor us in these fields?
Yes, I think one of the best things that they can do is to help educate their fellow man, woman on these issues who may not be people of color. Right. Because very often we are the ones who have to keep carrying the message and pushing it out. But it shouldn't just be people of color who do it. It shouldn't be just women do it, because it's about the global community. It's about everyone. And no one should sit back and feel like, I'm safe or I'm good, because we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
We're all in this together. So helping others to understand this, to be educators, to work with us on these so that we're not always carrying the torch, and to understand that they have a responsibility as well.
Thank you for that. So now we're going to move to our audience Q&A. The first question I have is, when discussing young people looking into the field, Ambassador Jenkins stressed researching opportunities, which I completely agree with. On the other end of that, how do we encourage more young people, especially of color, to garner interest in this space and know that they have an opportunity to have a real voice in shaping international policy?
One is what I said before, which is, there's two things. One is to encourage all of us who are in the field or getting into the field to encourage young women and young people about the excitement of this work, and that being part of our responsibility, I think is really important. And the other one is to continue to bring people up into the ranks. It's important to me to bring more people up who are people of color, so that everyone can see more of this. Because as I said, it's amazing how when people see that and they don't see that you don't see anyone. It's just you're not encouraged. I didn't see a lot of people in this field, but I just loved doing it so much that I stayed in it. But if you don't have that desire to just stay regardless, it can be very daunting when you don't see. Yeah. So as I said before, all of us who are in these fields, everyone here is a role model.
Right.
You don't have to be seasoned to be a role model. Everyone's a role model. And so, taking that seriously and playing that role of helping others to understand why this is important work, I think will be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I can say this, and you might agree, being the first and the only is the hardest. But you leave a blueprint, you leave a trail for others to follow, and you do make a difference. You make a difference in your creativity, your thought process, and all of the research that you did. It actually comes to life. So, leave people here knowing and inspired that you actually do make a difference in these spaces. The next question is, with a lot of the global and social issues around the world being shared via social media and the internet so quickly, many young people, and especially communities of color, often have a distrust for the government or don't feel confident that they can make a change in public service. What would you say that could change their minds? That's a very good question.
Well, I think, I'm not a social media expert, but I think, there's a lot of positive and negatives in social media. So, there's a lot of things that people can dislike, not just the government, but a lot of other things based on what people are seeing on social media. I think the important thing is to be critical thinkers about what they see. My fear is that because social media is so fast, and people have just a limited amount of time, and if you're young and that's your perspective, because you don't have the perspective of having been on the earth longer, basically, and able to put things in a context. So it's very easy, I would assume, to see things and just kind of keep going. And okay, that's it. But the issue is you have to be critical thinkers. You have to, things are very fast, and it's easy to get news through social media. But you always have to be critical thinkers as well. You can't just assume that what you read is right. And there's a lot of positives about the foreign, being in government, being in, doing foreign relations issues, foreign service issues, but a lot of that doesn't get told,
Right.
because it's not the sexy stuff. The sexy stuff is the bad stuff. People like reading the bad much more than they like
If it
reading
bleeds,
the
it
good.
leads is what the,
Yeah, the news and the news
Right.
news as well. They love
Yeah.
read the bad stuff. So we never really, I don't think we ever had a culture of let's just talk about what's positive in the world. So and that's what people get geared to, and our culture gears people to that. And so it's no question that that happens. But we need to just be critical thinkers. Just say, okay, well, what else is everybody else saying? Just take a moment to say that's very interesting, but let's check and see what everybody else says, and do a little more research if you're interested. Do a little more research. I always tell my nieces Google it, and the reason why I say it is because it's so much easier. When I grew up, I had to actually go get encyclopedias. But now everything is so you don't have to run to the library and get the encyclopedia and read everything. You just Google it, and you can find 5 different sources on the same thing. So just take the time to do that, and then you will find that maybe, well, okay, well, actually there's a little more to this than I had thought. Or maybe this perspective is based on this person's own particular self-interest.
Absolutely.
So let me find out a little bit more detail. And I think that's, social media is what it is. You're not going backwards, and that's okay too. But at least be critical thinkers. At least ask the question, maybe I should check a few more sources.
check a few more sources, challenge even newsrooms and outlets that may be very popular, because like you said, and I say this coming as a communicator who works very, very closely with the press, they come from their own perspectives and their own biases. And I think even from, again, we talked about a local perspective. I have a lot of local reporters that I work with, and their perspective is very, very different from Beltway, Washington Post, and everyone that we know or anyone that we see on TV. Or even internationally. I mean, the way, like you said, we're talking about Russia, Ukraine is, if you're in Europe, you're looking at BBC, you're looking at France 24. It is very different from the way that our outlets here are talking about that. So that's why, again, having that perspective and diversity of thought is so important. And again, contact your member of Congress. You are represented, you voted these people in for a reason. Talk with them, email them, write them letters. Mm-hmm. They will give you the time of day, and that's another reason, that's another way you can influence policy. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your greatest achievement as undersecretary? There's so many, so take your time.
I guess there's two things. One, for me, being an undersecretary means different things for different people. So for me, I want to, one, be a role model for others, and I want to practice what I preach. For example, on diversity. It's very important to me to have a staff that looks diverse, because I wanted to be a role model for everyone else in my bureaus to say that this is what it can look like. This is what all of the bureaus can look like, and we have really, I have really qualified people in my staff, and not only is it a great support system, but it's a role model. It is a role for everyone else. So that's very important to me. That's been a great accomplishment, because it's hard to. It's never really been done in the international security field. It's just because of the fact that there's so few of us, and it's so heavily male-dominated, white male-dominated. The other thing is, for me, it's about management. It's about having people in my 3 bureaus and the AUKUS bureau who are able to feel like they can come and do their jobs. I'm not a person that's a lot of pomp and circumstance. I'm a very down-to-earth kind of person, and I want my staff and my people, the people who work for me, to be able to come to work and do their jobs, and keep a lot of the bureaucratic. I mean, you can only do but so much in bureaucracy, in government or academia or wherever. I mean, that's just the nature of things. But for me, it's about representing them to the 7th floor, what we call the 7th floor, where the undersecretaries of the secretary and deputy secretary reside, to let people in State Department know the great work that's done in the 3 bureaus, because if very often the three bureaus have been put aside, like, oh, those are the tech people, or those are the security people, or they're dealing with all the hard stuff.
Right.
We're going to stay over here. Not that stuff had stayed anywhere else, so that's not easy. But, you know, and I think that it was very important to me from the beginning for people at State to understand the great work that the bureaus do. And I think that I think I've been very more successful than that than I had hoped. At least I think. Even things like doing a newsletter that I share. I mean, just these are the wonderful things that these folks are doing that people don't know. So for me, it's not so much, you know, putting a shining star out there, because I feel like I've done that. I mean, I feel like I've done that already. For me, it's more making sure that I take care of my people.
And you do. I very much closely follow your Twitter. You're always promoting the work of your bureaus, and I'm sure they're very grateful for that. The next question I have is, with all the major global issues happening across the world today, what role does the Black American perspective have on international policy and security?
Well, I think like the Black perspective should have, I mean, everybody's perspective should be mentioned, but I think the Black perspective is important because, you know, our culture, it's interesting. We have obviously a long history in America that has never really been lifted enough, has never been acknowledged enough. I think Black History Month is a great opportunity every year to do this, though I think it should be done on a regular basis, not just 1 month. So I think it's important to people to understand the role that we have had in American history, but also the impact and the role that we can have in what we're doing today. And that's why I promote, you know, the Black perspective and the foreign policy work that we do, because it's a unique perspective based on our history in America. So I think it's important. I think, you know, as I said, it's, you know, people of color have a perspective that's so important when we're talking about foreign policy, because our policies affect so many parts of the world that's represented by people of color. And I also think that we have a unique perspective.
Absolutely.
Black Americans.
This next question is germane to that. It says, in raising the next generation of influential Black leaders, what's wrong with saying I don't see color or teaching children not to see color?
For me, what's important is to recognize that there are diverse people in America, and there are people, as I said, who have a history in America that has not really ever been, in my view, acknowledged enough, as I said. You know, one of the things that's great about Black History Month is, you know, there's this great Twitter site that, you know, every day there's something new about Black history or Black Americans. The first of this or the first of that, you know, nobody learns in school.
Right.
I mean, still stuff I'm still learning.
Absolutely.
And it's a shame. And so I think for me the important thing is just to recognize that that exists. I know some people are worried that if we do that somehow we're sectioning people away, and, you know, no, we're just recognizing American history. That's all it is. It's not being separatist or anything. It's just recognize that there's a history that we bring that has not been acknowledged, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. So for me, that's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
You know?
What women and women of color in foreign policy have shaped your approach to your work and this field?
I have role models who are not necessarily in my field. I've always, you know, Harriet Tubman is my ultimate role model. Marian Anderson, Billie Holiday. I mean, they're not in my fields,
Okay, yeah.
but these are women who have, you know, I can't even imagine. I know being Black American now, but I can't imagine what it was back then. You know, trying to accomplish what they accomplished and accomplishing enough that they are the ones we do hear about, you know. I mean, that's a lot, you know, and I admire people who have made it through very tough times and have persevered. So there's men and women who I look as role models, and those are some of the top three.
Okay, that's wonderful. We have so many more questions, and I know we're coming up on time, so I am going to choose one from the batch. Hopefully people aren't mad at me for choosing one out of these amazing questions. Yeah, let's just pick the last one. So it says, on a lighter note, aside from this event, what fun activities have you done or will do for Black History Month? And in what ways do you suggest that people can celebrate?
Fun. I enjoy this kind of thing. I like
It's
doing
a party in here.
It's a
We're
party.
having fun.
Yeah, there's some streamers coming down soon. No, I enjoy just, as I said, there's just great stuff that's coming out on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on all these platforms about history. There's so much more now than I guess every year maybe there's more as we find more ways to educate. Even while there's cities and states that want to take books off the shelf. Fortunately, we have things like the internet, which doesn't matter. We can still find things out, and you can still learn history. But I see some really funny videos that are like just celebrating Black history, all in a positive way. Doing these kind of events, which is always fun.
Yeah.
And just having a month to just learn. I like to learn, so
Absolutely.
just learning about our history is always good. I celebrate that.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time,
Of course.
your service, your excellence, everything about you. I really appreciate you being here today with all of us, and we're going to give it to Katia to close us out for a closing
Before
remarks.
we do, thank
Okay.
you as well.
Thank you.
We want to thank Ambassador Jenkins and Jelena Porter for their time and insights shared with us today. So many gems and food for thought as we continue to shed light on global policy and its intersectionality with people of color. As we continue to celebrate Black History Month, let's do so through empowerment and honor our power and position of influence in the international policy communities we serve. Let's take agency to create space for other perspectives to be heard and represented for the value they bring to global policy. I think it's understood that diversity isn't an option for an inclusion in foreign policy, but it's a necessity to ensure that we're advocating for the right type of change and that we're advancing the voices of those that are equally important to be heard and brought to the forefront of policy and the decision-making table. I want to take a special moment to thank Kiana Cunningham and our Black Employee Network, Ambassador Ramayad, Janine Scott, Jane Kim Colosius, Linda Landers, and our events team for their role in making this a successful event. And thank you all for joining us today for this very important conversation. Stay balanced and stay blessed.